Major funding for these broadcasts has been provided by grants from New York Community Bank, AmTrust Title Insurance Company, Perfect Building Maintenance, M&T Bank, Customers Bank, Marks Paneth LLP, Capital One Bank, Collins Building Services, Meridian Capital Group. Additional support has been provided by grants from AKA Hotel Residences Corman Communities, Ariel Property Advisors, Amerant Bank, Bank of America Merrill Lynch, Briarwood Organization, Chase Commercial Mortgage Lending, Chase Commercial Term Lending, Citizens Bank, Dime Community Bank, Douglaston Development Levine Builders, Flushing Bank, Friedman LLP, Handro Properties LLC, Handler Real Estate Organization, Hodges Ward Elliott INC, Investors Bank, James D. Kuhn Real Estate Institute at Syracuse University, John Casamatides Red Apple Group, Keysight Capital Partners, Matone Group, New Banks, Newmark Knight Frank, Ocean First Bank, Optimum Window Manufacturing Corp., People's United Bank, Rockefeller Group, Rosewood Realty Services, Stonehenge NYC, SVN CPEX Real Estate Services, Tierra CRG, the Marengo Family Foundation, and these friends. Here we are, 2020. What's the world like? What's going to happen? Where do we see employment? Where do we see taxes? Where do we see hospitality? Where do we see opportunity funds? I don't know the answer, so I assembled this group of legal eagles to provide their views on the market. My guests, they include Joel Marcus, who is the managing partner and senior partner at Marcus & Pollock, also known as our tax certiorari expert. Marshall Brovost, head of the real estate practice at Oric, who's a generalist. And last but not least, our managing partner and head of the litigation and hospitality practice, Jack Gordon at Kemp Beatty & Gordon. So you're the generalist in the middle. Jack's a litigator and hospitality, and this is a tax man. Where do you see the market? I mean, do you see things changing, as we were saying in the green room? You know, people are a little worried because it's too expensive to operate in the city of New York.
I think there are a lot of warning signs and a lot of new legislation that we're digesting now. It just happened in 19. I think we're going to be digesting now. We'll be digesting into 2020. We've got to find a place where transactions are happening.
You know, one item that you mentioned in the green room, which I think is important that people are not aware about, is the Climate Act.
Yeah.
You want to talk about that?
I sure will. The Climate Act was enacted in the city. It's probably the leading greenhouse gas limiting act in the country right now, and other cities are following New York's lead. The important thing is that 70% of greenhouse gases are caused, it's been estimated, by buildings in New York City. So the way New York City's treating that is by certain buildings, buildings in excess of 25,000 square feet.
Right, but people aren't aware it's any type of building. It could be a cooperative apartment house, it could be a rental building, it could be an office building, it could be a warehouse and industrial, all different classes.
There are some exceptions, but like you said, it could be any type of building, 25,000 feet and square feet and up. And by 2030, which is only 10 years away, there's got to be a 40% reduction in greenhouse gases from those buildings. By 2050, it's got to be an 80% reduction. And I think people need to get their hands around how they're going to pay for it and what work they're going to do, what retrofitting work is going to have to be done in the next 5, 6, 7, 8 years.
So what effect does that have on your hospitality clients?
This is going to be a direct impact on the rent, to the extent that ownership needs to pay more to maintain a building, they pass it through to tenancies. The tenants are the restaurateurs who are already squeezed. And if it's too expensive to keep your doors open because you're ultimately just paying the landlord for the privilege of doing all the work to keep a restaurant going, you're going to shut it.
Lots of people want to own a restaurant. It's appealing, it sounds interesting, but what's the statistic? 1 out of 10 win?
If you have linen, which is not necessarily fine dining, but above fast casual, you're looking at a restaurant with a life of, on average, 18 months for more than 90% of them. And the pro formas that are created, even though they're very puffed estimates of how things are likely to go, rarely show a return on capital within 30 months. Mostly it's 3 years. But if you're only open for 18 months and you're shutting, you're not actually making the numbers in your pro forma. So 9 out of 10 investors in restaurants are going to lose their shirts.
So what are they going to the business? The sexiness? The appeal?
Because it's sexy, because they think they found the right woman to run a really great space, that they're going to use kind of grassroots marketing to get their friends to come in. And it's not going to be like the 3 other places on the same street. This is going to be the one that takes off. But don't get me wrong, Michael, when they do work, they work like a charm. You had August on your show. He's got L'Artusi at 228 West 10th Street. He's in his 13th year now. The place is banging out quarterly distributions for 13 years. Anybody who believed in him when he was looking to raise capital at that time made a really good choice.
So what effect does all of this have on the taxes?
Well, if you're talking about, in particular, hotels, they have really been crushed by taxes. Taxes went up about 16% on average over the last 10 years. And hotels, you know, there's been a tremendous number of additional rooms that have been added to the market. And so there's a lot of competition. The room revenues are flat.
But you know, when you have 67 million visitors, so let's, you know, which relates to hospitality, and 140,000 rooms, it's still not that much in the scheme of things.
If you look at some of the websites like Hotels Tonight or Booking.com, most of the year you can get a pretty decent hotel for under $200 a night. It's only in certain crunch months like June and in December where they start getting rates of $700 a night because there's no rooms available. So they really make their money in a very, very short season. In addition to that, the challenges on hotels are tremendous because there's the wage demands, the property taxes, and hotel revenues actually have already plateaued, and some of them are really dipping. But the tax today is significantly higher than it was 10 years ago.
You were talking before in the green room about the pied-a-terres. Why don't you talk about that?
The pied-a-terre tax could be very destructive. And the reason for that is it's not like a flip tax where you sell a property and there's a percentage of the sales price that becomes the tax. This is an annual tax. And at the top end, it's 2.7%. So you can have taxes on a high-end condominium that could be $1,400,000 on that unit. Now, if you take that and you put a capitalization rate to it, you know, you're looking at about $11 to $12 million off the market value. On top of that, it's going to frighten away that high-end purchaser, which actually puts the high-end purchaser puts no demands on the city. Fire, police, etc. They're not even here, and they're employing, you know, domestic help. They're going to the expensive restaurants. These people are being frightened away, and the market actually on the very high end has gotten pretty soft.
Everybody for the last 2 years has been talking about opportunity zones. Where do we really stand with the opportunity zone?
For the last 2 years, people thought opportunity zones were the next big thing. They're just going to happen in 2019.
And you do realize that if you operate a business in an opportunity zone such as a restaurant, there are certain tax ramifications also. You can postpone the taxes.
Well, look, as a tax deferral planning, I mean, I think it will draw monies into opportunity zones, whether it be through operating businesses or real estate. And I think people have thought that by 2019 things would be it would be more mature than it is. I think money's slowly going into it. I think, from my perspective, what I've seen is local investors, rather than the big institutions, doing it in their own communities. That's how I've been involved in opportunity zones.
Have you seen money being put into the opportunity zones in the restaurant business?
New York City is kind of a unique marketplace because you could count on your two hands the number of restaurateurs who own their own buildings. So
this isn't for ownership. This is operating.
No, I understand that, but the advantage of the opportunity zone is predominantly with respect to, I understand it, the operators in the space and the ownership of the building. And so you see a lot of growth, or saw a lot of growth in Harlem over the last 5 or 6 years, even before the legislation was enacted, because there are some tax advantages to doing so. But for somebody opening in the West Village or on the Upper East Side or even in the Lower East Side, no, it's not.
Right,
you know,
it's not
the
considered a zone, but Harlem is, Jersey City is, a number of parts in New Jersey, something like.
Tremendous number of opportunity zones,
Right.
Quite a bit of Queens and the South Bronx. I mean,
Yeah.
there are lots of opportunity zones in New York City. Not surprised. We're thinking that there's going to be more opportunity zone investment in the near future. That being said, at the end of 2019, the last quarter, you've seen more monies being put into qualified opportunity zones to take advantage of certain tax benefits accruing in the next 5 years.
The key in the restaurant business, one of the most profitable areas, is the liquor consumption in the restaurant business.
Sure.
Okay. You have two potential problems right now. The tariffs being one, and then the other item that you brought out, that it takes time to get approval for liquor licensing. Want to address those two areas?
Sure, let's take them in the order in which you raised them. The tariffs are a big threat to everyone in the production through consumption chain of beer, wine, and spirits, to the extent that they're going to come from Europe and they're going to be subject to what is currently threatened to be a 100% tariff. And there are a lot of nuances to what the tariff is being applied to, whether it's the value of the product X winery, the value of the product FOB at Le Havre, the value of the product FOB in Elizabeth, New Jersey. But one way or the other, whatever that value ends up being that gets assessed 100% tariff, that will translate in a glass to double the cost.
So it'll be good for the domestic manufacturers.
It's a boon. But one, there isn't enough availability of product in the United States. I'm with industry people every day on this. The little guys, the little distributors are going to be knocked out of the box entirely. They will not be able to sustain the incremental cost. They'll be stuck with inventory, and in the end, they'll have to shutter. The bigger guys will be able to survive the storm. I don't think if it happens at all, if it does, it's going to be long term. I think the whole concept is very illogical, that you're going to apply a tariff to products that have nothing to do with the reason you're applying the tariff in the first place. But everybody's nervous, and people are saying, place the orders now, because if it's not in the U.S., as of the time the tariffs, if they go into effect, you're in deep trouble.
Let's bring up the other subject, the liquor license.
The liquor licensing issue. So for a smaller store, for a restaurant that's going to be under 100 seats, you're not likely to get much in the way of tenant improvement money from the landlord, and you're not going to get much in the way of a rent concession, meaning a time where you're going to be able to do your own build out, your own gussying up of the space. The current average right now is about 3 months. You can't actually apply for your liquor license until you have at least the cover page to a lease to submit with your application to the SLA, and you don't get there until after you're past the LOI stage. And so you have to be pretty far along and pretty much committed to taking that space. You're now going up to Albany with your application after you go to the if you're in the city, your appropriate CB, your appropriate community board. They're going to suggest restrictions, limitations on your license. We're okay, but no live music, nothing over 80 decibels. You have to have a sound barrier between your ingress and egress,
200 feet from the local
outside.
church.
And those are separate SLA requirements, but the CB requirements could be, you need sound buffering. You have to close at midnight.
Right.
We don't want you open after midnight. And so that goes up to the SLA, and now because of a whole host of reasons, computerization, a change in the management structure there, it's taking 6 months to get a liquor license.
It takes 6 months once it gets to the SLA? Or?
Once it gets to the SLA. New York is a strange bird. You are not
but people think
legally...
you can bring your own bottle. That's...
And people have done it.
I have.
Cesar Ramirez did it for Brooklyn Fair. You see it all the time. I'm waiting for my liquor license. So while I'm waiting, bring your own bottle against the law. You're not allowed to permit people to consume alcohol in a public space, your restaurant, unless you're licensed to sell that alcohol. That's just the law. We're trying. I chair the City Bar Hospitality Law Committee. We are proposing legislation to actually permit this very concept. While I'm waiting, just so long as I comply with the conditions of the prior licensee in these premises, at least permit me to let my customers bring in their own alcohol so that I don't have to keep my doors shut while I'm paying rent, which is what the end effect of this 6-month delay with a 3-month time frame from the landlord is. You've got 3 months where you're ready to open, but you can't because, to me at least, people have done it. To me at least, you can't open a restaurant in New York if you're doing sit-down linen or better and not have alcohol.
But isn't most of the profit in the alcohol?
Yeah, the margins on the alcohol are much better than your margins on the food.
Now I have to throw a question to the two of you. With regard to June 14th, 2019, legislation goes into effect changing the residential market. The fair market and stabilize. What effect have you seen, or what are you projecting to see in the transfer tax and with regard to the reduced value because properties are being sold for less money?
It's a devastating effect, particularly in the rental apartment market. And I can tell you that my clients have said to me that they think there's a 20 to 30% reduction in the market value. And part of the reason is you can't get the major capital improvement increase in rent. You can't get the vacancy decontrol. And many of these properties borrowed from their lenders, predicated on the fact that they were going to increase their rental and they had a discounted cash flow that's out there. Now they can't meet that anymore. And now these properties may have been over leveraged, and I think you're going to see some foreclosure activity as a result of it. In addition to that, the capitalization rate, the rate of return, was predicated on that growth of the upper line, the gross income, and that's not there. So the city is taxing these properties using outdated capitalization rates that are very low, predicated on an increase in income. So they're being crushed.
So people like you in your practice, you'll go and try to get it amended.
Yes, we will try our best to get it reduced to reflect the reduction in value. But what's happening, though, is the city is very slow to recognize these trends. And in fact, the city has increased the levy about 10% a year. In 10 years of expansion, there's no money put aside for a rainy day. So if you have a reduction in value in one sector, let's say the residential apartment sector, they still need that same amount of money. So they're going to raise values, or they're going to raise the tax rate, and they're going to collect it, and they're going to be taking away equity and value.
So they're going to take from Peter to Paul.
That's right.
Now, where are you seeing that in your clients?
So I would say this. I would say a couple of things. First, my clients are recognizing that there's been a wild shift in valuations just based on what their investment thesis
Which is
was.
also going to have an effect on your clients also.
Sure.
Yeah,
Everybody
sure.
follows.
It all trickles down to the guy on the ground floor.
But I would say this. I would say it's not just the current rent regulated. It's buildings that have ever been rent regulated, because now the focus of our of the city, of the state, of regulators is looking at the multifamily market, which, arguably there's spillage throughout the multifamily sector. It's if apples to apples. If you're looking for multifamily, maybe New York, you want to wait and see what the comps are, and while you're doing that, you're looking outside of New York.
What about minimum wage, tip credit, other effects today on the retail and the restaurant world?
Well, I can speak to the restaurant world. We have in the city already enacted a $15 minimum wage for restaurant employees. The tip credit has been reduced. It is now $10.
Explain what the tip credit is.
Okay, the idea of the tip credit is that an employer who's hiring a waitress to service tables knows that that waitress is going to get tips at the end of the meal, unlike in other countries. And so while that same employer can't use those tips to compensate other management or back of house because of the 80-20 rule, they have to touch the table 80% of the time, those people who are service workers in the restaurant can be paid a lesser wage, just so long as their lesser wage plus their tips
Equal to the $15.
equals at least the minimum wage, which is currently $15. So the tip wage in New York is 10. And so if you serve a table and you get a $100 tip, and let's say you're not tip pooling or tip sharing, that's your $100. You work a 5-hour shift.
So it's $20.
You got $20 plus your 10, you're making $30 an hour. Now the dishwasher in the back is not allowed to take any portion of the tips. That was the whole wave of lawsuits that we're now seeing trickle down to the smaller shops. But they started at the big stores, the multi-unit places, the places that are doing $20, $25 million a year in business, because there's a lot of money in that. It's double penalties plus attorney's fees, and it's for every hour. The same thing with overtime. There were, and there still are, but there were a lot, now there are fewer of the overtime cases. And most chefs think this way. I'm going to hire the guy on the line, I'm going to pay him 60 grand a year, and he's going to work 55 hours a week. So you pay him 60 grand a year, he goes to a plaintiff's lawyer in this industry and says, oh great, you're working 55 hours a week, so you got paid no overtime. So you're going to now take out your calculator, calculate his annual pay for 40 hours, and then say every hour over that should have been at $16.50 times 1.5, because overtime is
Right,
1.5.
1.5 times.
So now we're looking at a $22 per hour claim for 15 hours a week, going back 3 years for maybe 100 employees, multi-million-dollar claim, plus attorney's fees.
I mean, you have international clients who come to your office. I know, so do you. What do people say? It's prohibitive to do business in the city of New York.
You know what's interesting is that for a number of years, not talking about recent legislation, for a number of years, it has always been prohibitive to work in New York, but unbelievably, this is the one place where you actually can turn a profit if you do it right. Even in the hotel business, we had a hotel operator out of Texas, and they owned lots and lots of small hotels, but they came into New York, they looked at the cost of coming in, it was tremendous, and yet the only hotels that they were able to sell for a big profit were in New York. So it's a tough town, it has a very high cost of entry, but ultimately there are some rewards. Now what we see now is some of our local homegrown developers and owners are beginning to think that that's over. And they are now sending their best people around the country and developing in other cities, because New York, I think, has turned the corner and it's inhospitable to real estate and business development.
Marshall, have you seen foreign investors walking away?
I mentioned a moment ago that a number of our domestic investors are looking outside of the 5 boroughs, and they're looking to Pittsburgh or yes, St. Louis or other cities. We have picked up a number of international investors, Asia, Japan, Scandinavia, Persian Gulf, who are looking for yield. And they're looking for yield in a 24-hour city that's exciting, that's New York. And so we're finding that they're coming in and perhaps bidding on buildings that some of our domestic investors aren't as excited about, but there's yield there.
What about tech? I mean, what effect is the tech industry having on your clients and on your clients?
We did a project for Oxford, the St. John's warehouse, and I know that when they were originally envisioning it, they didn't have a tenant, and then Google came in and took over the entire premises, and it's going to be a very spectacular development. The tech people find that they have to come here because the talent is here. Now they have to come here because this is where they're going to get the education, and they're going to find the people qualified additive value to their business.
So even though I was making believe that my apple was dull listening to the comments, I think it's positive over here. And the city, people want to be here, they want to live, they want to work, they want to shop, and they want to visit. But I think 2020 will be a good year no matter what. I'd like to thank my friend Joel, Marshall, and Jack, and see you next week.